Hello everyone, this is Mariah Cruz, and you're listening to the Spiritual Deep Dives podcast. For thousands of years, there were ancient spiritual truths and mystical teachings passed down only to the highest initiates walking the path back to God. It hasn't been until recent times that this secret knowledge has been available to the masses. Our team spent over 40 years researching many diverse spiritual, religious and scientific sources, recording the wisdom from the ascended saints and sages of East and West, tapping into the Akashic records and calling on God's Holy Spirit to reveal the spiritual truths and science behind the unseen forces that govern our lives. In this podcast, we will explore these teachings from a unique perspective that you probably have never heard before and show practical ways you can integrate them into your life to resolve deep-seated personal problems, accelerate your soul's evolution, and help solve the world's dilemmas. In this episode, the Macchio brothers will reveal more shocking revelations about the spiritual history of Earth and the cosmos, exploring the ancient rebellion of Lucifer and his legions, the true identity of Satan, how these fallen beings infiltrated the 4 lower planes of matter, and how this ties into the UFO phenomena. So without further delay, let's start this deep dive and see where it leads. At the end of the last episode, we were talking about Satan. Most people think that Lucifer and Satan are the same person. Let's start by talking about this. Revelation 12 verses 7 through 9 says that when Lucifer fell, he had legions of followers under him. This included millions of his lieutenants. So as discussed in episode 4, we have the word dragon, we have the word serpent, we have the word devil, and we have Satan, which means adversary. Again, all these terms don't necessarily refer to the same being. Satan, the name we commonly use, was actually Lucifer's lieutenant who served right next to him in authority. Lucifer and Satan were 2 different beings. We say were because both of these individuals have gone through what's called the second death that is mentioned in the book of Revelation. They no longer exist, but those who fell with them are still here and on other planets working their evil works. We also want to reiterate that the term Earth in this passage refers to the 4 planes of matter. What are the 4 planes of matter? They are the lower etheric plane, the mental plane, the astral plane, and the physical plane. These correspond to the 4 lower bodies of man. We have the physical body, the astral or emotional body, the mental body, and an etheric body, which includes both the higher and lower etheric levels. So, when the fallen angels were cast out into the earth, it means they were cast into the 4 planes of matter. But the key point here is that the 4 planes of matter correspond to the 4 lower bodies. There's a very interesting correspondence between the planes, the bodies, and where these fallen angels ended up. We can't conclude they only wound up in the physical plane in a physical body. They also ended up in the mental plane, which corresponds to the mind, and in the astral plane, which corresponds to the emotions. It's literally a different plane of existence, each vibrating at a different rate that our physical sight can't for the most part see. This is a concept we also outlined in the last episode. So, just to reiterate, there could be hundreds of thousands of fallen angels in the mental plane of existence. There could be hundreds of thousands or even millions inhabiting the astral plane. And of course, they are also in physical embodiment. We also wanted to underscore the fact that when they were cast out, they were also cut off from all the higher spiritual realms. This is an important point we want to discuss. They could never again enter the higher etheric levels known as the Buddhic plane. They could no longer enter nirvana, that is, unless they changed. It would be a different circumstance for them if they bent the knee to the Christ and said, I will submit to the testings and balance the karma of rebellion. I want to completely restore myself and get back to where I was in service. But they failed to submit and no longer had the direct connection to the God source or access to these higher etheric planes. They were confined to 4 planes of the lowest vibration of matter and consciousness. You can see why this would cause extreme anger. Imagine, at one time they had access to an almost infinite number of planes of consciousness and states of being that reached higher and higher into realms beyond our imagination. It was no longer possible for them to attain these higher levels of divine consciousness simply because they were not there anymore. They were cut off from that magnificent bliss of nirvana. And, in terms of the actual universe itself, they began to infect other people with their deceptive reasoning. What the Luciferians did was travel from planet to planet, from solar system to solar system, and even to the galaxy known as Andromeda, spreading this rebellion like a cancer. The seeds of Lucifer and Satan were scattered throughout the cosmos. Now, what are these seeds? They manifest as influences. Remember, they had taken over the mental plane. These influences only took root on planets where the people there were already vulnerable because they had already lost contact with their divine source. Only these races of people were susceptible to this kind of invasion. So even Andromeda, a galaxy far, far away, was invaded. These seeds manifested as ideologies such as humanism and intellectualism, where the ego becomes God, as we explained in the last episode. We think that when Lucifer was on the move, he would cloak his rebellion in a very appealing way, so people would readily accept him and his deception. When he arrived with his brilliant intellectual argument, you can imagine these people thinking, well, he's got a point there. Lucifer and the fallen ones conducted what they called wars of liberation. They told the people they were being liberated from their karmic condition. Just imagine a soul who is sincerely working on trying to balance their karma and striving for soul evolution. And here comes this fallen one saying, why do all that hard work to balance your karma? I can liberate you from all of that. Why work through your karma when there are shortcuts? Lucifer would offer a brilliant intellectual argument. Why would you want to pay back your karma? Why go through all that suffering and growth? He'd say, we're superior. We don't need to do that. We can bypass the system. So they created a new set of laws to supposedly liberate them from the laws of God. These so-called laws of liberation were seen as a tremendous breakthrough, at least in the eyes of those who had forgone contact with God. Lucifer was essentially telling them, I'm liberating you from the oppressive rule of the spiritual hierarchy. I'm freeing you from the chain of command, from the cosmic beings, even from God himself. You no longer need to be subservient to this God. So he became like a hero and a great liberator to millions. And the people would say, thank God for the coming of this brilliant being and all of his followers. Now I no longer have to work out my karma. Maybe there's another way. Maybe there is no karma. He used various techniques to persuade people to his way of thinking. He was rebelling against the divinely appointed rulers of the universe, beings who had earned their positions through spiritual evolution by passing their tests and ultimately making their ascension, which is the goal of life for all of us. These ascended beings had been granted positions of authority, ruling over planets, solar systems, and even galaxies. All of this is discussed in detail in the teachings of the Ascended Masters through various publications and materials released by the Summit Lighthouse. But what Lucifer and his followers actually wanted was anarchy. The Ascended Masters have told us that the original anarchist was Lucifer himself. That's very interesting because he rebelled against the spiritual hierarchy and the sacred lineage of the gurus. This lineage of gurus passed down their teachings and their light. They shared their divine consciousness with their students, and Lucifer rejected that. He rebelled against it. And at that point, unless these fallen angels changed, unless they repented and were restored, there was no longer any possibility of achieving the ascension as we said earlier. Now, Lucifer would also throw in the idea, why do you have to wait? Why are you waiting on these gurus to give you anything? I can give you the information right now whether you're ready for it or not. That was the message. You don't have to evolve and take the time. You don't have to pass your tests. You don't have to go through the transfiguration. You don't have to go through the crucifixion, which is the Christian terminology. You don't have to experience the resurrection or the ascension. These are all spiritual initiations we are all meant to go through, and Lucifer's message was, forget about it. That kind of message, of course, would cause chaos. It would lead people to think, maybe there's a shortcut, maybe there's a faster way to get ahead. So now you have the Luciferians and the Satans doing their own thing. In their view, they were freeing billions of souls. They saw themselves as autonomous, independent from divine law. This is amazing, isn't it? They believed they were freeing billions of souls. What a great release of freedom, at least in their minds. So now we're in a situation where there were countless planets and entire sectors of galaxies that were influenced. The Ascended Masters haven't fully revealed how much of the galaxy has been taken over. We've talked about the Milky Way galaxy and also Andromeda. We didn't want to imply that the entire Andromeda galaxy was taken over, but there are sectors within it that were indeed infiltrated by billions of rebel souls. So now again, we're back to the similarity with Star Wars. Remember, we previously mentioned that the writers of science fiction, including the author of Star Wars, were tuning in to the ancient memory of these cosmic events held in the Akashic records. They are the same kinds of events that the Ascended Masters had started revealing to us many decades before the Star Wars series. Additionally, traces of these stories can also partially be found in the Old and New Testaments of the Bible, as well as other texts. We don't want to imply that the Akashic records are only accessible to messengers or those with contact with ascended beings. As we discussed in episode 1 and 2, science fiction writers, for example, can and do also tune in to these ancient memories. It might not be word for word or filled with extreme detail, but the overall scenario is definitely coming from these records. The storylines may not mean that all the characters in Star Wars are historical figures per se, but the ideas, the situations, the dynamics between the two sides, the use and misuse of divine energy, the dark side and the light side, those concepts are rooted in reality. So this rebellion spread like a virus. Lucifer was basically proclaiming that there is no God, that we don't need God. God is unnecessary. When it suited him, there was no God, and it would make sense that sometimes he would incarnate into situations where it was okay to follow a heavenly hierarchy as long as it served his purposes. In other words, if you followed his theology, his way, his philosophy, whether it was a philosophy of economics or of religion, then you were fine, but it had to be on his terms. If you remember in the 1960s, we had that famous line, "God is dead." There are many people on Earth today who follow that mindset, and we now know its origin. It's a Luciferian consciousness. That doesn't mean the people who were saying those things were Lucifer himself or even consciously aligned with him. But that's how it works. You tap into this consciousness and this way of thinking, which is a certain way of intellectualizing everything. Now, souls of light who are the children of God sometimes cross over to the dark side without even realizing it, though it's often only temporarily. Just because a child of God spends 1, 2, or even 3 embodiments in that state of consciousness doesn't mean they're now a rebel angel in embodiment. We can eventually come out of it. We can completely come back, and sometimes it can happen in a very short period of time. It could be just a part of one embodiment, then something clicks, something triggers that divine memory, and we reconnect with our true source and let go of the idea that there is no God. We also wanted to add that when Lucifer took over some of these planets, they eventually became materialized and mechanized. This happened because over time in their evolutionary journey, they actually rejected spirituality completely. But at the same time, they advanced tremendously in science and materialism. They made brilliant advancements, but with no spirituality. Nothing was endowed with the Spirit of God. Instead of achieving a fusion of science and religion, they rejected religion altogether. They separated the two and excelled in science without the guidance or presence of the spiritual hierarchy, or without the flame of spirit. Spirit is meant to inhabit matter, It raises matter up, just as it raises us up in our four lower bodies and soul. But the Luciferian plan was to separate them, to reject religion, and instead excel in science alone. And so on some of these worlds, technological advancement reached astonishing levels, far beyond what would be familiar or even believable to us today. For example, they created tremendous spacecraft and found ways to neutralize or eliminate the pull of gravity, enabling these craft to move instantly from one place to another. We don't believe we have the terminology for the mechanisms they are using, but we do know that they are advanced far beyond even the most sophisticated devices we have on Earth today. Some of these spacecraft, if not all of them, are actually able to navigate in the physical plane, the astral plane, and the mental plane that we talked about earlier. That's why some people who see UFOs say, "Oh, there it is!" and then suddenly it disappears because they can instantly move into the astral dimension and come back. Of course, in the 1940s, UFOs became very popular because of the growing public awareness about the greys. The Roswell incident was a big deal. We're going to dive deeper into all of this as the series moves forward, but we don't want people to think that as soon as we mention UFO, we're referring only to the greys, the ones with the big eyes and long arms that they are commonly portrayed as. A lot of people know about the greys. They also know about shapeshifters and reptilians. There's a lot of talk about whether they're able to reincarnate after they inhabit the Earth for however long they live. They are still subject to the laws that exist on this planet, but just because they pass from the screen of life doesn't mean they come back into embodiment. So, circling back to science and spiritualism, in the heaven world, there's a balance of spirit and science. There's an immense science used by ascended beings, so creating spacecraft for travel is not the issue. If they need a craft to move throughout the galaxies, that's fine. These are benign spiritual beings, which makes the difference. However, as we have been discussing, if they're not spiritual beings, but of the material creation denying anything beyond themselves, then we have a problem. And this is where these various planets and people who may look very human come into play. These races have advanced in mental brain power without the spirit, and to such an extent that they are sometimes even worshipped as gods. But they are not part of God. They are the ones that Lucifer took over. They became highly advanced in technology, but not in spirituality. We know from sculptures and carvings that spacecraft were known about in ancient times, from Sumeria, Babylon, and India to South America and Mexico. They have been used on this planet for over 1 million years. The question is, where do they come from and who's manning them? The answer is that most of them came from planets that had lost their contact with spirit, with God. This doesn't mean that there weren't spacecraft from good planets where that race was not yet ascended. But most of the situations we've seen on Earth in the past have involved those who came to exploit Earth's resources, those who wanted to genetically manipulate the people of Earth and other planets. They have no good aim or purpose. The fallen ones still use spacecraft today in an attempt to take over this planet, but the point is, they have not been totally successful, especially as time goes on. As we said in the last episode, this fall goes back tens of millions of years, and over that time they lost the spiritual attainment they originally fell with. They fell with a certain amount of momentum, but as time went on, that momentum got used up. It could be the reason why they would now need to use spacecraft to move around. So despite their advanced technology, they don't really have the power, even though they think they do. But those who came from the God source and understand themselves as sons or daughters of God know otherwise. Whether you see yourself in the image of Brahma or any other name for God, if you have some understanding and belief in a power greater than just materialism and intellectualism, then these fallen ones don't really have the power they think they have over you. They don't have power over us if we call upon God as Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva, Allah, the various Hebrew names for God, like Elohim, the I Am presence, or the I Am that I am. Once that protective shield, the so-called tube of light, which the ascended masters teach about, is firmly established around us, they can't get through. They can't get through if you've truly called and invoked your God source, by whatever name, through the spoken word. Because again, they only have power over those 4 lower planes of matter we mentioned earlier: the physical plane, the emotional or astral plane, the mental plane, and the lower etheric. Your connection to the God source that we discussed in episode 1 goes way beyond these lower planes. So there's always a way out of these negative influences. We want to play for you now a Tube of Light decree led by Elizabeth Clare Prophet that you can easily learn. You will find a link in the program notes to a YouTube video of this decree with the words. If you give this several times a day while visualizing a brilliant white light coming down from your God presence all around you and blazing violet fire saturating your aura, you will be establishing a strong protective shield against these malevolent forces. So, here's the decree.
Beloved, I am presence bright. Round me seal your tube of light, from ascended master flame, called forth now in God's own name. Let it keep my temple free from all discord sent to me. I am calling forth violet fire to blaze and transmute all desire, keeping on in freedom's name till I am one with a violet flame.
Thank you for listening to another very revealing expose. The Machios have a lot more exciting things in store for you. In the next episode, they will continue the story of Lucifer and how the Luciferians clone themselves, produce false creations, and they also will reveal the secret of creation on this planet and others. Thank you for listening to Spiritual Deep Dives. If you like this content, please like and subscribe to our podcast. We'll catch you in episode 6.